Grief is such an overpowering emotion, especially after losing someone so close to you. It can take months, years, even decades to get back to normal, if that's even possible after experiencing a significant loss. This podcast is created to help you move through and release the emotions, allowing you to heal the hurt and begin living again. Listen in as I chat with medical professionals, grief workers, and people who have first-hand experience in losing a loved one, what their experience has been, and what they did to help heal themselves and those around them. Life isn't always sunshine and rainbows, but I believe there is always a silver lining if you're willing to look. Welcome to the Release Podcast. Welcome back to another episode of Release Grief Podcast. Today I am here with none other than Jason Tuttle, and chatting before I even hit the record button, like, it's already been amazing. I already wish I would have already hit the record button on the conversation that we did have. But I guess we'll just have to redo it all. So before I started, I had asked Jason, and he told me an amazing story. I asked him if he knew the Tuttle twins because of his last name, and he began to tell me this amazing story about needing a van and raising money for it. And he'll be able to tell you much better. Can you kind of sum up what you told me earlier, because I just found it fascinating?
Sure. About 3 years ago or 4 years ago, well, first of all, uh, I had my son who had multiple disabilities, multiple special needs, wheelchair bound. And then 2 years later, we had our daughter who had the exact same number of issues, exact same
Mm,
issues, except for the rare condition that my son had. Uh, and she was essentially wheelchair bound. So, I realized real quickly when they started getting bigger and getting their wheelchairs that we were going to need a lift van. And so the issue that you run across in the lift van industry is most of the vans are only set for one wheelchair, like the Honda Odyssey style van. And
mm,
so we needed a van that could hold two wheelchairs. Well, to find a van to hold two wheelchairs like that is a challenge unto itself because they're out there, but they're not readily available, so to speak.
right.
So we I'm outside of Atlanta, so we had to drive kind of to the northwest side of Atlanta, which if you know anything about Atlanta, it's about 100-mile drive to get from where I'm at to where that's at. I mean, Atlanta just takes over North Georgia. So we found one at a place in Northwest Atlanta that was a Ford F-350. It's like a Ford Transit, but like a Ford Transit on steroids. And it was customized and had the hydraulic lift in the back, almost like a lift like a delivery truck has on the back of
Mm,
it that'll lower down to the ground and lift something up. I can roll them in. So when we went there to price them originally, we were before we knew what prices were, we were kind of stunned at how expensive they were. Like they started about 50K and went vastly up from there and very quickly up from there. So after we went the initial time, we came back and we thought, well, what are we going to do? You know, how are we going to raise this money? We don't have $55,000 just laying around that we can, and we can't afford the car note on it, even though they would finance it out for 10 years versus 5. And so we decided to just start doing a GoFundMe. And, you know, the uphill battle with the GoFundMe is at any one point, there's 5,000 of those exact same pages on GoFundMe at any one
mm.
time. So I started promoting it, and as I mentioned to you before we started this, I raised more than $55,000. It was more like 75 to $80,000 that I
Oh,
raised
wow.
through a GoFundMe. It was solely on Twitter. I never asked for a dime. I basically went into people's accounts that, you know, were of some renown, whether they were an athlete or an actor or a musician or people that I knew in the community, and said, look, I'm not asking you for money. If you want to donate, great. I do appreciate it. Thank you. It is well received. I said, but all I'm asking you to do is to take 10 seconds to hit retweet. And I said, the goal is that somewhere in your following, someone will go, hey, let's see what the story's about,
Yeah.
and maybe they'll donate. So I got Carl Weathers, who played
Yeah.
Apollo Creed in the Rocky series, to retweet it. I got Joey Fatone from NSYNC to retweet it. I got several former Major League Baseball managers to retweet it. One of the original guys that started off in MMA before it was the MMA that it is now, who's a big name, retweeted. He actually donated soon thereafter.
Oh, wow.
Um, and then the other big name that I got, if you watch the FBI series that's on right now, the woman that plays the head of the FBI in New York on the original series, Alana de Garza, I messaged her and just said, look, all I'm asking you is to retweet it. If you wouldn't mind, I would appreciate it. Well, she immediately did. And soon thereafter, all of a sudden, we got $1,000 donation under a name very similar to her stage name
Ah,
on there. And I went and she never did reply back, but I thanked her profusely. And I said, look, I've got a news story coming out in my local news in here, Atlanta. I said, to let you know that I'm legitimate, I will share you the link so you can see our story. I said that my worst fear is people think that I'm not
right,
legitimate, that I truly cannot afford this, and I truly appreciate your help. And so as soon as that happened, I sent her. I never got a reaction from her, but I just it made me feel better that she knew that I was
right,
legitimate versus me just trying to scam money out of people or people
right.
thinking I was. So I do all this, and then I run across the Tuttle twins, or the author that does the series. And I said, hey, yes, I've got the same last name as you. I said, honestly, if you have an empire related to your book, I wish I was related to you. I said, but I know as well as anybody else that you don't go into writing to make millions. And so they kind of chuckled about that. And he said, sure, I'll share your GoFundMe. And he asked if I'd ever read the series. I said no. I said my kids, even though they're at that point, they're beginning teenage years, which is what those books are kind of geared for. I said they function at about 5 or 6. I said, so I can read them to them. I said, but will they comprehend them? I don't know. I said, I'll certainly pick one up and see if they like it. Well, little did I know, about a week later, he sent me his entire series, like all 16 books. He sent me, and which, if you've never seen the books, they're big for a teenager's book, but they're not like a Harry Potter book. I mean, they're
Right,
probably 60 pages maybe per book. And even still, I was just like, wow, he didn't just send me one, he sent me the whole series. And
right.
so I was kind of floored by that. So that was very generous of him.
That was like
Mhm.
that's just incredible anyway, just reaching out to the people. That's a smart move.
Mhm.
To reach out to like these bigger names with a bigger audience to be able
Mhm.
to capitalize on that to get the van, which is brilliant marketing, to be honest.
Well, and even we had a story done on the Fox affiliate. We actually had one on the Fox affiliate and the NBC affiliate. And when I say to you, not 60 seconds after it aired, I'm dead serious. They did the story 60 seconds after here. My phone blew up.
Oh,
Literally, it
wow.
went ding, 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 ding. I mean, just every 2 minutes I was looking at my wife and go, you're not going to believe this. You're not going to believe this. We tried to find them, but in Atlanta, we have a professional soccer team called Atlanta United. And we actually had a former Atlanta United player that night donate 10 grand, just boom.
Oh, wow.
And so from my point of view, he was anonymous because it was my mother that made the GoFundMe. And so
Mm,
I said, can I get your login information? Because I want to see who this name is. Not to put it out there that he donated this, but just to
right.
thank him. And so I
Yeah.
could never find him. I think he got traded to the Orlando team, and I tried to find him and thank him, but I never could find him. And I mean, that's all I really wanted to do was go,
Right.
this was a very generous donation that you did not have to do. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, it was almost instant from the time those stories aired.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. So, talk to me a little bit about your son. You said he had a rare medical condition?
He did, he did. So. my wife and I got married, and about a year after we got married, we decided we wanted to have family. I'm from the South, essentially. She's from the Northeast. She originally wanted 4 kids. And when she said that to me, I went, I have no problem having a large family, but let's have the first one and then let's talk, you
Right.
know. And so the other funny thing was I'm a planner. She like when it comes to knowing the sex of the child, I'm a planner. So I made the nursery. I did all the painting, I did all the setting up. So and I didn't want to paint it in just the neutral colors because
Mhm.
I was just like I want to know boy or girl so I can kind of cater it to that versus
Right.
the greens and the yellows and that kind of stuff. And so I wanted to know, she didn't want to know. So we went through the whole process. Initially, after she got pregnant, there were no issues, all that. And then we got to the week 20 appointment, which is the appointment that everybody looks forward to because at that point you can find out the sex of the child if you want to.
Right.
So we go into the OBGYN and she's doing the ultrasound and we're playfully going back and forth of do we want to know, don't we want to know? Because she was of the mindset, well, this is the last great surprise that you have in life, that kind of thing. And I was just like, my ADD, OCD brain, I've got to know because I can't plan without knowing that I don't want
Right.
to paint it pink and him be a boy, that kind of.
Right.
So we get to that point, and all of a sudden, the ultrasound tech goes, "Well, I found an issue. I need to know the sex of the child." And we go, "What does the sex of the child have anything to do with what you found?" She said, "Well, depending on the sex of the child, it's either rare or even rarer."
Oh,
And
wow.
so we both looked at each other, go, "We want to know the sex of the child." She said, "Well, you're having a boy," and I said, "Well, what's the issue?" And she said, how did she put it? She goes, well, I think I know what it is. She said, but I'm not the doctor. And she said, legally, I cannot tell you. She said, you're going to have to make an appointment with like a perinatologist, which for those that don't know, that's essentially a high risk doctor because an issue has arisen.
Mhm.
And so she said, he's going to have to tell you. So we started going to the perinatologist for weeks. And in those weeks, I, over the years, I've learned these days doctors will either tell you nothing or minimal, or they will tell you everything under the sun to cover their rear. They'll
Mhm.
either give you kind of a there's hope scenario or all the
Yeah.
gloom and doom so that they can't get sued. And I have said to many doctors over the years, said, I am not going to sue you. I know y'all don't know everything about medical
Right.
science. I said, now if you make a glaring mistake, that's a different story.
Right.
I said, but if you tell me it's Down syndrome and it's more cerebral palsy, I'm not going to get on to you.
Mhm.
I get it. And
Right.
so in those weeks leading up, it was he's only got one kidney, and that one kidney has sustained some damage in utero, and that was
Mm.
very true. Up until after he was born, he literally only had one kidney, and I
Okay.
mean the doctors weren't necessarily concerned about it, but they were just like, you can live on one kidney, but the issue is it sustained some damage. So the question is how much good kidney does he have left to
Mhm.
sustain normal function? And
Right.
so we had that. And then at one point they thought he might have hydrocephalus, which is water on the brain, which can cause developmental delays. They thought there are areas of missing white matter in the brain, which could cause developmental delays. There was like 5 or 6 different things that they told us, and the ironic thing is the one appointment I couldn't make was the one appointment that they bombarded my wife with all this information, and she
Oh.
just left out there just crying.
Oh, I bet.
And I'm just like, I've been to every other appointment, and they wait to the one appointment that I'm not there to do this. And so we went back and forth and back and forth. So finally, my son was born, and he was born with a condition called Eagle-Barrett Syndrome.
Hmm.
It's also affectionately known as prune belly syndrome. The easiest way to explain it is it's a rare condition related to something in the development of the kidneys and in the midsection. They don't officially know what the cause of it is at this point. It's 1 in 40,000 births that it happens, or at least it was when my son was born. I don't know if that's changed or not. So it's 1 in 40,000 births. So basically, what that means is he was born without any core abdominal muscle. He had no abs, no obliques, no top and bottom. So,
Oh,
like when
wow.
you look at him and he rolled to his side, you could literally see organs floating around, and you could see the width of his back muscle when he rolled on his side. It was a
Oh, wow.
the first time you ever saw it, it would freak you out. I
Oh,
mean,
I
it
bet.
it did for me because I was just like, well, what's that? And then, later on after seeing specialists and all that, they kind of told me. So he didn't have any of that. Um, he had a bladder that was abnormally larger, and he didn't get the sensation to go to the bathroom. So, whereas you and I get that full feeling, we go, well, I got to go to the
Mhm.
bathroom. He didn't necessarily get that. So, at least in the beginning, I had to learn how to cath him every 4 hours, and
Oh,
I had to
wow.
manually drain his bladder.
Right.
Um, in the beginning. And then on top of that, because it never fully drained, he was always at risk for urinary tract infections
Yep.
because essentially urinary tract infections are caused by the protein in the urine that's in there. And if
Hmm.
it sits in there, that's what gets infected. And then that's what causes all the symptoms related to urinary tracts and tract infections. So we dealt with that. And then on top of that, he had normal lungs, but they were slightly smaller because he didn't have the core muscle strength when he got like a chest cold. Whereas you and I have the force to kind of cough up the phlegm and all,
Oh,
he didn't
yeah.
have that.
You didn't have that.
And so in his room, I literally had 6 respiratory machines that I was trained on. And when I would hear it, I would start my progression. Well, I'm going to start with this. Let's see. There's an encephal. Let's see. How does it go? There's a Hill-Rom vest machine that beats on his chest to kind of loosen it up. There's an encephalator that I then have to put on his nose and his mouth that blows in there and sucks it out. That kind of brings it up. I then have a suction machine that I go in and literally suction out the back of his throat. And then I have a nebulizer to give him breathing treatments to kind of help keep it free and open. And
Hmm.
so every as a parent, you'll understand, but when your child gets sick and they make a specific sound that you're used to, well, when he was getting sick with his respiratory illnesses, there was just a certain cough that he made. And I knew at that point in my head, I thought, all right, it's time to start going on the protocol of what I need to do. Because what was happening, if I didn't catch it fast enough, it was just compounding in his lungs. And
Hmm.
if I waited too long, inevitably he would always get admitted into the hospital,
Yeah.
always. And so that was that was life for like the first 5 years of his life. I was in and out of the hospital ICU every 6 months.
Mm.
Like every one time when we got into the ICU, I asked the nurse, I said, I'm just curious. I said, I know hospitals are expensive. I said, I get that. But I said, what does it run for my son to be in this ICU
Mm.
per day? And she said, just to have the bed, it's like $9,000 a day. And I went, ooh.
My goodness.
And she
That's
said, but
crazy.
she goes, you also have to remember you got 24/7 round the clock nurse care that's 3 feet from you versus on a
Right.
regular floor where they've got 8 or 9 patients or 10 patients per nurse. Whereas
Right.
I've got 2 or 3 patients.
Yep.
And so we had to do that. But so that was the Eagle-Barrett syndrome. One of the other issues with Eagle-Barrett syndrome is they have massive kidney issues, like to the point of having a transplant. And knock on wood, we never had that issues up until the day he passed. And
Okay.
so that was the Eagle-Barrett syndrome. On top of that, he had developmental delays, which were considered severe. So even though he was 15 when he passed, he functioned probably 5 to 6 years old
Hmm.
up until the day he passed. On top of that, he had epilepsy. He had seizures. Um,
Mm.
he was nonverbal. He could walk with assistance, but essentially he was wheelchair bound because he couldn't do it for long periods, long distances. So I would have to put him in his wheelchair.
Right.
So in theory, he was wheelchair bound, but he wasn't really, but he needed a majority of the time. So those were all of his issues. And to add a layer to this whole story, especially with grief, is his sister had all of the exact same issues as he did,
Mm.
except for the Eagle-Barrett syndrome. So I had two nonverbal kids, two severely delayed kids, two kids with epilepsy, two kids that are wheelchair bound. And in fact, of the six different kinds of seizures, I've seen four of them in my lifetime.
Oh, wow.
And so that was essentially life up until my son passed away.
Wow, that's a lot. That's a full-time job in itself. Probably a couple people full-time job.
It got to the point because my degree's in physical education. I taught PE for almost 9 years, and that last year in education, I called my wife one day from my office in the gym and I said, we got to make a decision. I said, because I've taken so much time out that I'm working for free. And I'm
Right.
like, if I'm going to do something for free, I might as well be a stay-at-home parent and be around the clock care for him versus me being. And I said, plus, on top of that, there's outside of having to teach six classes a day, doing lesson plans, doing all the stuff related to education with the meetings and the events that we did. I said I was 24/7 care for my son. I did all the medical stuff, all the hospital stays, all the doctor's appointments, because at one point we had seven specialists.
Right.
So, and I had to see all of them once every 6 months. And so I said, something's got to give somewhere, and I'm not going to let it give on the home front. So I
Right.
said, unfortunately, it's coming out at work and my job is suffering. And I
Mm-hmm.
said, I hate to admit that because I'm a perfectionist and
Yes.
all that stuff. But so in January of that year, I went up to my principal and just said, look, I said, what would be your response if I decided to resign to be a stay-at-home parent? And she was just like, well, I'd be surprised, but she said, I understand.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, I said, you'll have a decision here shortly. And it was literally the next day. I shouldn't have done it this way, but I wrote a note in black Sharpie on a piece of white paper and just said, you know, to my principal, I said, I've decided that I'm going to resign to be a stay-at-home parent. This resignation is effective immediately. I said, today is my last day. And so I get a call on the radio and she goes, Mr. Tuttle, can you come to my office? And I went, I know what this is regarding. And so I came in there and she goes, I'm not surprised at the fact that you're resigning. She said, I'm surprised at the speed in what you're doing it. I said, well, I'm one of those people that,
Make a decision to move.
yeah, when I know I want something, I make it and I move. And so she said, well, do you need next week? I said, no. I said, I will have all my stuff in a box and I will be driving out of this parking lot before you ever leave your office today because it was a Friday. And I
Mm-hmm.
made sure to look in her window when I drove my truck off that parking lot and she was still sitting in her office. And so that's essentially how all of this like special needs journey kind of started. And I was a stay-at-home parent for 12 years before I went back to work.
Okay. And how old is your daughter now?
She is 15 going on about 40. She she's 15, but she functions at about 5 or 6. So imagine having 5 or 6 year old kind of thought process, but a teenager's attitude.
Yes.
That's
Yeah.
what I get to deal with on a daily basis. And I
Oh my
keep
God.
telling myself all the time, I wanted a girl. I wanted a girl.
You just didn't know what you were asking
I,
for.
I did not.
Yes. So how long has it been since Zachary has passed?
Zachary passed away um, January 28th, 2022 at 10:34 a.m.
Okay. Okay. Gotcha.
The story behind that is um, the irony of all of this is when COVID came around, I was very stressed because he was always susceptible to respiratory illnesses. And with COVID
Hmm.
being a respiratory related illness, I was stressed for 3 years.
Oh, I
Honestly, I'm
bet.
surprised it did not cause me any health issues or heart problems because I was highly stressed for three, especially when they were going into school while it was going on, even though they were wearing masks, kind of thing. I was highly stressed. So, We made it through the first year with no COVID in there, and then the second year, I actually brought COVID into the house. Unbeknownst to me, I caught it somewhere, and I went to go make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and I went to go smell the peanut butter, and I went, oh no, because I
Mm,
couldn't smell it.
right,
And so I got tested, and it almost immediately came back, and I was concerned because for a week before that, I was literally this close to my son for days on end, not realizing I was contagious.
right.
And so the irony of all of it was I caught it, my daughter caught it. We had no symptoms. The only two symptoms I had was I had really bad headaches for about 3 days before. I lost my taste and smell. No other symptoms. My
Mm,
daughter, if we hadn't have gotten her tested, we would have never known she had it
hmm,
because she had literally no symptoms that we know of. And then my son, who I was 2 inches from for a week before, never caught it, never tested positive. My wife never caught it, never tested positive, and we were all in the same house. So I don't know
right.
how that happened. So we made it through COVID and all that stuff, and so about 3 days before he came home, and typically what we would do, because our daughter got a little more attention than our son in the evening, because she was, for lack of better ways to say, a little more high maintenance. Because my son was always laid back, nothing bothered him. There were days I would cath him, and he would literally sit like this as I was putting a tube up his manhood to get to his bladder, and he would never flinch. Whereas an adult male would probably go, "Whoa, what are you doing?" you know
Right.
and
Absolutely.
um so about 3 days before he came home, we fed him one of his favorite meals. He ate like a horse, that kind of thing. We put our daughter down, and we would typically keep our son up about an hour and a half after our daughter, just to give him one-on-one time with us versus essentially battling his sister for attention and all
Right.
that kind of stuff. So we did that, and we're in our bedroom, and so my wife goes to get the electric toothbrush and brush his teeth, and he throws up a little bit, and which didn't really surprise us. We were just like, well, maybe we went a little too far back and hit the gag reflex and something came up. Didn't think anything about it, brushed his teeth, put him to bed, went to bed. Well, he was up and down all night, and it's unusual for him to be up and down. And so the next morning we get up, and with like his teachers, I'm always a text away. So I would always tell his teachers, if you ever need anything, just text me. I'm within about a 30-second response time. I said, because my phone's always on me. So that morning I text her and go, Zach's not feeling well, not sure what's going on. I said, I've just got this gut feeling that, he needs to be at home. I said, plus if he's contagious, I said, I don't want to bring it into your self-contained classroom and infect anybody else. And the school was great. They're just like, great, thank you for doing that.
Mhm.
We'll see him the next day, if he's feeling better. Okay, not a problem. So that day, I tell him all day long, I'm just like, buddy, you can take a nap. I'm just like, you're not missing anything. I said, you want to know what Daddy's going to be doing? I said, I'm going to be sitting on that couch over there on my laptop. I said, that's all you're missing. And so he would not take a nap. And I found that for some reason, just found that unusual that he just didn't want to take it. So I didn't see anything other than that. I just figured he was overtired. He you know how kids they get overtired, and then they can't fall asleep until they finally completely relax. And
Right.
so he did that all day, and then finally that evening I just looked at my wife. I said, let's put him to bed the same time as we put our daughter. I said, give him an extra hour to be able to sleep, that kind of thing. I'll check him in the morning. And see, that was Thursday night, and I just said, if worse comes to worse, I'll keep him home. It's Friday, right before a 3-day weekend. And I said, and then we'll have like 6 days he's been out to completely try to get whatever this is out of his system.
Hmm.
Because at the time we thought it was just like a 24-hour bug, is what he's had him
Right.
multiple times throughout his life. Didn't think anything about it. Had at that point had no real concerns, thinking something was wrong. So he goes to sleep that night. Don't hear him. We think, well, maybe he's just exhausted, that kind of thing. Next morning, we get our daughter up, put her on the bus. We give him till about 8:30 in the morning, go into his bedroom, and he's there, he's awake, and I go over to him and I notice there's this dark green streak coming out of the right side of his mouth. And now I don't have a whole lot of medical background, but what I've learned over time and just watching medical shows and what I picked up from his conditions, I went green. I was just like, the only thing that comes out of your body that's green is bile. Why is bile coming out of his mouth? And so I pick him up and he's really floppy, like he can't hold himself up.
Mm.
So that didn't really strike me just because there have been times in the past where he's really sick, where he was admitted in the hospital where he was that way. And I just figured whatever it was took a turn. I really needed to consider what I was going to do.
Right.
I bring him out into the living room and I go ahead and cath him just to make sure his bladder's not just ridiculously full and that's causing issues, and to relieve
Right.
pressure. Don't get a whole lot out. I check his temperature. He's not really running a temperature, that kind of thing, but he's still just kind of lethargic and floppy. And I look at my wife and I go, huh. And now, as a side story, I have over the years got so good at reading his body language that there was one time that when I took him into the hospital, when they did the x-ray of his chest and they admitted him that night and did the x-ray again like 5 hours later, they came back and said, I don't know how you did it. And I said, how did I do what? They said based on the x-ray that he came into the ER last night to the one now, that x-ray when he came to the ER was literally the formation of pneumonia in his lungs. They were just like, you could not have caught it any earlier than what you literally caught
Oh,
it at its
wow.
beginning point. And I said, there was just, it was a gut feeling. And I just said, I couldn't shake it. And so that's why I brought him in.
Hmm.
So he's laying on the floor in the living room. I cath him and I look at my wife and it was honestly a hunch. I went, huh. I said, I'm going to take him up. In Atlanta, we have Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, and on the north side of Atlanta, we have a Scottish Rite Hotel, which is the hotel we always took him to. And so I go, I'm going to take him up to Scottish Rite. I said, something is not right, and I cannot pinpoint it. I need to take him up there. And she goes, okay. So I get him in, we get him dressed. I get him into his wheelchair. I get him in the van and I drive off up there, and I call my mother and just say, look, I said, I'm taking Zachary up to the hospital. Something's going on. I don't know really what it is. I said, but I'm taking him up there. Now I am essentially 60 miles from this hospital that I have to drive across and through downtown Atlanta.
Right.
And so from where I'm at, and so I'm like flooring it. Like I'm doing 90 miles an hour
Right.
because I don't know what's going on with him. And there are times where he looks like he's kind of lifting up his midsection like he's in pain. And there are times like he's looking like he's falling asleep. And I'm snapping my fingers at him because kind of like a concussion. I don't want him to fall asleep because I don't know what that'll cause.
Right. Absolutely.
And so as I'm driving up, I'm literally going, Zachary, Zachary, stay with me, stay with me. And I'm looking in the rearview mirror and I'm driving into Atlanta. Well, if you've ever driven in Atlanta,
Hmm.
traffic is trash. Uh,
Yes.
and so I get through the center of Atlanta, and on the north side of Atlanta, there's a major exit called Buford Highway.
Okay.
And so I drive through the center of Atlanta, and on the board it goes, all lanes blocked, Buford Highway. And I go, oh no. And so we get to slowing, and now luckily I happen to catch it right toward, like, they're cleaning up, I think is what they're doing. So I'm inching along for about 15 minutes and I finally get up to the front, and I don't know if they were letting us go, but as soon as I see daylight, man, I floor it. And I can see the construction guys just, swearing at me because I'm driving through, and they could have been finished. I don't know, but they didn't know what the situation in my van was.
Right. Right.
So I get up into the parking lot. I park in the parking deck. I get him out to his chair. He's really floppy, the more so that I'm used to at this point. I put him in his chair. I get up to the ER, and like most ERs, there's a line you got to get into. I skip the line and I go, like I'm going to the desk, and like the security guard's about to get up to me, like to say, what are you doing? You got to get in line. And I immediately go, I don't think he's breathing. And so the security guard looks at the nurse and literally snaps his finger, goes, you need to come over here now. And so she looks at him, she goes, follow me. And we literally run back to the trauma room. So I've been in a hospital for 15 years with my son. So I unstrap him from his wheelchair. I put him on the table in the trauma room, and I immediately back away as to hopefully be able to stay in the room while they're working on him
Mm-hmm.
and just be out of the way. And as luck would have it, there was a trauma room connected to it that was open. Nobody was using. So I backed off in there. And literally, the moment we got it, like 40 people all just kind of run into this room and like ants out of an ant hill and start. And even though they didn't have defined areas, I can to this day I can tell you exactly. It was like every two people was a different like specified thing they had to do all the way around the table. So they get him in there. They immediately start cutting off his clothes. They immediately start doing chest compressions on him because his breathing rate's really low, all that kind of stuff. And then the ER doc comes over and she goes, "Down to the minute, to the best of your recollection, how long has he been this way?" And I said, I had to drive up from Coweta County. So I said 30 or 40 minutes, plus or minus maybe 5 minutes. And she goes, okay. So she goes in there, starts barking off orders. She comes back to me and she goes, explain to me why you brought him up here. And I told her everything. And so she listens to me and she starts barking off orders again. So they continue doing chest compressions and they've intubated him and all that to get air into his lungs, that kind of thing. And and I'm watching this like a hawk just because I don't know what's going on, that kind of thing. And at this point, I, I still feel like there's some hope per se, just because I'm not watching monitors or anything like that.
Right.
So after about two or three rotations of chest compressions, they get the paddles out, which nowadays they're just stickers they put on you versus the old paddles where you rub them
Right.
together kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And they do the typical clear and they hit it. And just like TV, he literally raises off the table.
Mm.
And and I immediately look at the monitor with his heart rate and his oxygen rate on there because I've looked at it 1,000 times with all respiratory illnesses,
Right.
and it goes boop and continues where it was going. And at that point in my brain, even though it didn't hit me, I went, he's not coming back. I
Mm.
had a gut feeling. I was just like, if they did all that, he's not coming back. And so, but they continue working for 45 continuous
Oh,
minutes.
wow.
And I later told the ER doc, I said, medical dramas don't do y'all justice. I said, now I
Right.
know y'all are going to work on to save his life, but to say y'all from the time he got in here to the time you pronounced him was almost an hour of continuous work. I said,
Yeah.
I said, as much as this sucks, I said, I appreciate everything y'all have done.
Right.
And so the head ER doc comes over to me. She said, now we can shock him again. At this point, they would be the fifth time. She said, goes, but I don't know if it'll do anything. And I go, well, I know a lot about his conditions. I said, but this is out of my medical wheelhouse. Um, do what you think is professionally what you think should be done. And so they do it again. Nothing changes. And then she pronounces and she comes over to me and says, I'm sorry. And I said, I'm sorry for your loss, that kind of thing. And understandably, I turn away and I kind of have a moment for myself. And I immediately
Right.
call my wife because she's working at home and, she gets hysterical and
Yep.
understandably so. And I said, call your parents, have them drive you. I said, I don't want you driving up here. Have them drive you up.
Right. Right.
And so she does that. And then I call my parents because when they were both younger, they watched him from time to time.
Okay.
And so they
Yeah.
were very involved in his care. And my mother and my parents were understandably the same way, that kind of thing. And so I regained my composure kind of thing. And the care team comes in there and I look at her and go, this is going to sound cold and callous, and I don't mean it to be. I said, in this special needs journey, I said, I've had to learn to compartmentalize. And
Yes.
I said, I'll deal with this in a minute and it will hit me later. I said, but here's what I need to know. What happens from this point? Are you going to see a coroner? If you see a coroner, are they going to do an autopsy? What is their decision to do an autopsy? What is their decision not to do an autopsy? If you choose to do an autopsy, what is the turnaround time until I can get him to a funeral home? When I do get to a funeral home, who do I need to contact to get my son home per se? From here to there, and I list off like 8 questions, and
Mm.
literally her mouth almost drops. Like, you just lost your son and you're concerned. And I was just like, look, I don't mean to be rude. I said, but for my brain, I need to know these answers. And she goes, okay. And so she walks off and she comes back about 5 minutes later and she goes, I've talked to the coroner and he's decided he's not going to do an autopsy. And without skipping a beat, I look at her and go, why? Why are you not going to do an autopsy? Just very stern.
Especially on a rare condition like this. Like
Well,
you would
and
think
she,
they would want to like see like the insides and stuff. My
yeah,
idea anyway.
yeah. And so I said, I want to know the protocol as to why you would or would not do this for, especially when he came in when he was healthy 3 days ago.
Mm-hmm.
And she goes, the coroner has, because like, as a side note, later we requested all of the files from our son in his entire stay at Scottish Rite. It was 7,000 pages.
Mm-hmm.
And so she goes, based on your son's extensive history at this hospital with all of his medically related issues, the coroner has decided that he's going to connect it or relate it to something related to his special needs. That is why he's not going to do it. And she goes, typically in a children's hospital, the only three reasons why we would do an autopsy is if they were completely healthy and all of a sudden they came in and then they passed away, if there were signs of abuse, if there were signs of drugs, or if there was something related to the legal system. She said those are the big reasons why we would do one. Outside of that, she goes, we don't typically do them. And I said, okay, I'm okay with those answers. Now, later on down the road, talking to my wife, I said, even if they would have done it, would we have found out any more information? Probably not. On his death certificate, it is listed as sepsis and cardiac arrest due to sepsis. However, based on what I felt in his midsection, because before I brought him up here, his midsection was rock hard, like table, concrete
Mm.
brick, rock hard. And I'm one of those people that when I listen, I pick up on things that maybe others don't. And so as they were barking things to each other, I was picking up on, they were saying, well, this color fluid's coming out or specific descriptive terms. So when I got the ER notes and I went back and looked at it and saw those in the notes, I went and looked it up. It is my 100% belief that he somehow got gastroenteritis and it got too far. Because if you look at any of those like Mayo Clinic or WebMD, all of them say if you have these symptoms, go to an ER immediately.
Mm-hmm.
And so, based on everything that I saw, felt, and heard, it's my 100% belief that he got gastroenteritis and that's what killed him.
Mm.
We would have never known. And
Right.
that's what I've tried to tell my wife over the years. I said, yes, it was quick. Yes, it sucks. Yes, we lost him. I said, but we would have never known to look for that. That was
Right.
nowhere on the horizon of any of his issues.
Right.
So I will say, as it relates to grief and all that, the hardest thing watching him pass was hard, and I still have my days with it and the
Mm-hmm.
PTSD related to it. But
Right.
the one thing I will tell people that is still the hardest moment in my life I've ever had was the moment that my wife and I left the trauma room and we had to roll his empty wheelchair with all of his cut
Mm.
off clothing on it through that hospital back to the van and drive 60 miles home. That was the longest drive I think we have ever had in our lives. And then on top of it, a lot of people would tell you my son was pretty vocal. So getting home because my daughter at that point, even though she wouldn't have understood it, she wasn't even home from school. So we had 2 hours in a stone cold silent house before our daughter ever got home. And I would to forever tell people, I said that silence was deafening
Right.
because we were so used to. And then even though my daughter couldn't voice her grief or can't voice her grief, for the longest time I thought she was angry at me because I was always the one to take Zach to the hospital and I always came home with him. So when she got home and I was home and Zach was nowhere to be found, you could almost see a puzzled look on her face.
Sure.
And so from start to finish, from when we initially saw the issues, it was 36 hours. And
Mm.
that sounds like a big number, but 36 hours in the
No,
grand scheme of things is a very quick turnaround.
it is. It's very, very quick. Oh my gosh, like there's so much. I can't imagine like the emotional roller coaster just having a child with special needs and then to be
Mhm.
having two children with special needs and all the symptoms going on
Mhm.
with all of the breathing and respiratory stuff like
Mhm.
you're counting off. And
Mhm.
your daughter had the breathing and respiratory stuff too?
No, she actually, of the two of them, it was my son that was always in and out of the hospital. My daughter in her entire lifetime has maybe been in the hospital twice. And one of those was a pre-planned scoliosis surgery where she got spinal fusion surgery.
Okay.
And so and not 6 months and not 6 months, no, not 4 months prior, my son had had the exact same spinal fusion surgery. And so it was always my son that was in and out of the hospital. And
Right.
I tell people all the time, if we did not have Georgia Medicaid and private insurance, literally to this day, we would be $6.5 million in the hole.
Right.
My son's spinal fusion surgery by itself was $405,000.
Yeah.
So it
Stuff
was
racks up very
ridiculous.
easy.
Hmm.
Oh my gosh. Like I was tearing up as you were talking about it because like losing a child is no joke, but
Hmm.
when you're emotionally connected to them as much as you were, I could
Hmm.
imagine just like it's like now you have like the emotions of like, okay, now what?
It
My
was,
day is like now what? Because it sounds like he filled a lot of your day. And now
yeah,
you're like, now what?
like from the day we brought him from the day we brought him home, which was 17 years ago. I have not had a decent night's sleep in 17 years.
Yeah.
I was constantly up and down. I dealt with insomnia, and because he was nonverbal, I got to know his nonverbal cues very well.
Hmm.
Like I can't tell you how many times, and I've never been one to brag about myself. I've always had a hard time taking compliments, and you'll see on my page on Facebook when people make comments, kind of that sentiment. But I constantly had nurses that would go, "You are the most informed parent I've ever come across." And
Absolutely.
I said, he's nonverbal. And I said, the more information I can give you in the 15 years of medical drama in the back of my head, the better decision you can make. And I said, so if you want the information, I said, I'll rattle off 15 years worth of information for you if you want it, just to give you, because I always look for patterns and things.
Hmm.
And so, because I always knew that there's some things that the human body does with patterns, but when it comes to seizures or medical issues or illness, when it starts becoming a pattern, that's when issues start arising.
Hmm.
And so I was keenly aware of that. Anytime something would happen, I would go, well, it happened once. I'm going to keep watching. If it happens again, then I'll make a decision. And
Right.
so, you know, I got to the point of reading by my wife hates it because my wife will be upset about something and I can read her like a book. And she go, don't rush me on how I'm feeling. I'll tell you when I'm ready. And I'm just like, you know, I can read you because I had to do it for 17 years with our son. And I said, I'm not doing it to rush you. I'm doing it because I can see there's a concern. And me being a
Right.
male, males are fixers. We like to solve problems. And I said, you may not want me to solve it, but I know there's something going on.
Right.
So that would be the only side effect from it that my wife never liked. She's just like, don't rush me. And so,
That doesn't sound like a horrible one. I mean, there's worse things that could, have been
oh
transpired
yeah.
after that. But well, I mean, that's fantastic. I think it's absolutely fantastic the intuitiveness that you have with him and the subtle cues that you're picking up. It shows that a lot of parents don't do that. Like just to
Well,
be honest, they don't. Because they
well,
don't have that connection, they don't take that time. And
well,
it
I
sounds like
will.
you're a fantastic parent.
Well, I would always get comments. People would say great things about my parenting ability and all that. And my response to this day will always be, well, I'm no different than it. I said, I get that there are deadbeats, mothers and fathers out there, but
Yes,
my
of
standard
course.
response is any caring, loving parent would do the same thing that I'm doing.
Hmm.
I am no different than them. Now, is my level of care ramped up? Certainly it is, because I have it. Like in the beginning, I used to tell people that didn't understand, I would look at them and go, with the combinations of issues that my kids have, there's nobody in a 1,000-mile radius that understands what we are dealing with.
Right.
I'm just like it just I'm not doing it to brag, but it is what it is. I mean,
Hmm.
you don't understand the fact that we have a neurologist, urologist, pulmonologist, all the therapists, all the school stuff, all I just until you deal with it like grief, you cannot fathom it.
Right. Absolutely. 100%. And if you don't understand it and get to know it, like with your son with disabilities and your daughter with disabilities, if you don't get to understand them and know them, then there's going to be things that slip out of your control, and it's going to start compounding. You're going to feel way out of your element. Anxiety is going to kick in. Like all of these other things are going to happen because you're not staying on top of, what needs to be stayed on top of.
Mm-hmm.
So I just find it, kudos to you. It's
Thank
amazing.
you.
You're very, very welcome. So now you said you also started a community?
Well, after my son had passed away, and I will say one, now I can laugh. Well, in hard situations, I have a weird, twisted sense of humor. So after my son had passed away, we went to the funeral home in our area, and we brought my wife's parents and we brought them because my uncle by marriage had recently passed away. So they'd used this place and they were familiar with it and the process, and they were a little more clear-headed than what we were. And so we
Right.
brought them along just as kind of sounding boards that we could use. So we go to this funeral home, and I mean, they're really nice, and I'll give them all the props in the world. They never pressed us to do anything. They never tried I never felt like they tried to take advantage of the situation, that kind of thing, because I know you hear horror stories.
Yeah.
So we get in there, and we get in their big conference room, the showy conference room where they can all the what they have or what they can do for services and all that. And so the gentleman sits us down and he goes, well, I'll lead you through this process. And he goes, it's a lot of decisions, and he said, I know this is the worst time of your life. And he said, but we'll take as much time as you need. And I said, well, I appreciate it. And he said, well, are you planning on burying or cremating? And initially we were just like, well, we think we're going to bury. And he goes, well, here's the process of burial. He said, first of all, he said, we don't do the plot. He said, you're going to have to go to a cemetery. And he said, I can tell you right now, they're not going to sell you just one plot. It's going to be at least two.
A
And he
family
said,
plot. Yeah.
he goes, it's going to be at least $600 per plot for them to dig it. And he goes, there's a fee to dig the hole, there's a fee to fill the hole. And he goes, that does not include the headstone. He said headstones go anywhere from $1,000 to $20,000. And he said, you're going to have to factor that in. And then he listed like several other costs,
Yeah.
and I didn't know that. I mean, I knew it was expensive, but I didn't know how expensive. And so I was just dumbfounded.
Yeah.
And he goes, and then caskets, he goes, caskets go anywhere from the very cheap, about $1,000, to just like headstones, $10,000. And
Right.
he, depending on what you want. And I said, well, what about cremation? And he goes, cremation is definitely the little more cheaper end of it. He said, he goes, I wouldn't say it's cheap per se, but it's significantly cheaper than say burying.
Right.
And he goes, the way we do that is, he said, when you have your service here, he said, you can either rent a coffin for the surface,
Mm-hmm.
the viewing, or he said you can buy one that will get burnt, that will get cremated with him
Right.
in the process. And the weird thing was the one that you used that you had to cremate with him was cheaper than renting one. And I was just,
Right.
for lack of better words, I was just like, well, that's kind of ass backwards
Uh-huh.
kind of thing. And so, but the one point that I had to laugh in this process, So we decided that we're going to cremate because it's a little more cheaper, and then we could have the urn with us, and we wouldn't have to
Hmm.
worry about it always being in one place. If we were to ever to move, we could bring it
Right.
with us. And then like we both got pendants with their ashes in it. Like in fact, mine, if I can get it off the table here, uh, this is the one I got with my son's ashes in it,
Okay.
which is a cross that has, and my wife has some angel wings that she's got with his ashes in it. And so we decided that we're going to cremate, and he goes, "I'm required by federal law." And I went, "Wait a minute." I said, "Why does the U.S. government need to be involved in our funeral?" I said, "I get we're paying taxes and all that." I said, "But why does the U.S. government need anything to do with the fact I'm cremating my son?" And without skipping a beat, he didn't even change his facial expression. He goes, "I'm required by federal law to tell you that once the cremation process has started, that your loved one cannot go back to the original state in which your loved one came into this building in." And
Oh,
I looked at him, and it slipped out. I didn't mean to say it this way, but I went, "Who in the fuck thinks you can burn someone to death and then it goes back to where it was?"
right.
I said, "Do they not realize it's fire? I mean, like hot fire." I said, "Have they ever burned wood in a fireplace?" And he doesn't say anything, but he just gives me this look of,
You
"You'd
have
be
no
surprised."
idea.
And the other astounding thing, it was a page, it was front and back, and we had to initial in like 9 places.
Really?
It
Just
was,
for that?
and I was just like, "Oh my God." I was just like, "You really,"
People think that?
I was just like, "You have to go to this much effort to tell someone?" And like I said, in risk of not outing someone, he goes, "You'd be surprised."
Yeah.
And so, but back to it. Remind me what you asked me again, as I've lost my thought.
I'm like, I don't even remember. Oh, about the community that you were building.
Okay, so before uh everything happened with my son, I was seeing a counselor or a therapist for other issues I've been dealing with, kind of related to the special needs life, some anger issues, and
Hmm.
issues dealing with, my life was supposed to be one way for my son, and
Right.
it's been taken away from us, and stuff related to not towards my son, but more what I was dealing with in
Hmm.
the whole special needs journey that I needed to deal with, because for me it was just becoming an issue.
Right.
So I was seeing her, and then when my son passed away, I continued seeing her, and it may have been her or my mother, or it may have been a combination of three or four different people that said, "Have you ever thought about journaling?" And I went, "Yeah, I'm not much of a writer. I mean, I do have my thoughts and all that, but yeah." And so I didn't really think much about it. And the therapist goes, she said, "If anything, it might be cathartic just to get it, even if you write it down and then throw it into like a fireplace and burn it."
Yep.
She goes, "It could be cathartic for you to get it out." And so I thought about it, and I thought, that might not be a bad idea, because I tend to hold on to things. And I said, it just eats me alive. And I'm just like, I don't need that on top of everything else right now. And so my mother got um, like a written journal, like I could write in it, kind
Yep.
of thing, right afterwards. And it literally sat on my side table for a year. Like I
Hmm.
never touched it for a year. And so I finally decided, and even though I didn't touch that, like I made, like on my computer, I made Word documents, and in letter form, "Dear Zachary," and put the date. And from the day he passed, I just wrote letters. And
Mm.
and even without it being grief, I'm someone that I just don't sugarcoat things. Now, I'm not rude to people, but I'm one of those people that believes you need to know the good, the bad, and the ugly about
Right. I agree.
specific things, because life doesn't hold the good, the bad, or the ugly away from you. You're going to get it whether you want it or not. And so I started writing all these letters. Well, I'm one of those people that when an issue comes up, like special needs issues or medical issues or even grief, I'll get on social media and see if I can find a tribe on social media, whether it's a group or people that have dealt with it, that I can bounce things off of. So I got on Facebook and found several grief groups, and a lot of the grief groups were, yeah, we've lost a child or we've lost a sibling or a mother or a father, but there weren't many that were related to losing a special needs child.
Hmm.
And so I don't want to rank death by any means, but when
Right.
you're someone that is 24/7, 365 giving care to someone that cannot care for themselves for a decade plus, and then they pass away, their death, in my opinion, it's just a different level.
Sure.
It's a vastly different experience. Yes, it's all terrible. Yes, it all sucks. It's you don't want it to happen, but that's what I try to relay to people that have never been caregivers.
Right.
When you're a caregiver, you give so much more of yourself and just life to the situation than what, say, you have a child that was like in an accident and they were killed, kind of thing.
Right.
And so it's not better than, it's kind of more adjacent because of just the level in which you're
It's just
working.
different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
This is different.
I found one on there called I think they've changed the name since then. It's like parents that have lost a medically fragile child or something like that.
Hmm.
A lady by the name of Stacy Mackey is the admin of it. So I got in there, and because I'm a male in the grief ward, I'm kind of a unicorn, if you will.
Yes.
And even in all the other groups I was a part of that weren't grief related, especially when it was a majority female in there, every time I would post in there, especially feelings related and all that, I always got a lot of response, always. And so I got in there and, I would make my statements and get a lot of response. And so out of the blue, the admin messages me, who I've later become good friends with, said, would you mind moderating this group for me? And I said, I'll moderate. I just don't want to admin it. I said, I've admin Facebook groups before. And I said, for lack of better words, I just don't want to deal with all the whiny ass adults that are going to come in there complaining all day. And I said, because you know as well as I do, that's what's going to happen. Because
Right.
for the neighborhood I lived in, I did one, and that's all I dealt with all the time to
Mm.
the point that I finally just asked someone if they wanted to take over, and I just left it because I was just like, I can't handle this stress.
Right.
And so I adminned it for a while, and then I finally just said, look, I said, I've just got so much going on with grief and then just personal issues and all that stuff. I said, I just can't do it anymore. And she goes, okay, that's fine. And I said, well, I said, I journal. I said, do you mind if I post some of my letters in here? I said, I seem to be getting some pretty good response from the general comments I make in there. I said, do you mind? And she goes, no, go for it. And so the first one I posted, and it was one of my, with probably within the first 2 months of me losing my son, and it was very raw. It was a lot of expletives in there, lot of dark thoughts in there, that kind of stuff. And so I posted it, and almost immediately the first comment I got, and this is their words, not mine, was, this is the first person who's ever made a comment that has explained exactly how I feel. Exactly. Down to the word. She's just like, you have a way of describing things. And I said, well, I appreciate it. I said, but this is my sugar coated, non sugar coated, raw, unfiltered. People need to see this. People know that people that deal with loss grieve, but a lot of them, because of their own whatever insecurities about it, don't really see it. They see kind of their rose-colored version of it.
Yeah.
And so I started getting more comments on it, and I was just like, huh. And so from time for several months, every once in a while I'd post one, I'd get the same kind of response was, wow, you've got a way with words and you're really speaking to me. And I had one lady go, well, you've spoken to my soul. And I'm just like, wow, I don't think I'm to that
I'm like, I
point.
need to pull back on this a minute.
And
No,
so I
it's
said,
okay.
I really appreciate, your thoughts, but I was just like, you're making me seem like I'm the greatest thing since sliced bread. And believe me, I'm not. And so I said, and so I kept doing it. And so somebody said, well, leading up to all this, I've had people for the year leading up to everything go, you need to write a book with just your experience in
Yeah.
special needs and grief and all that kind of stuff. And my response was always, I don't do well with deadlines. When I write these letters, it's in the moment of it. And I said that's the reason why it may resonate, because it's not forced. It's I'm having a tough time. These are my thoughts in this moment. These are things people can relate to, yada, yada, yada. This is why people, in my opinion, why they gravitate towards this.
Mm-hmm.
And then I said, I just don't know if I have enough material. Now, at this point today, I've got a binder this full that I could just probably have reprinted that could make a book if I really wanted it to. And
Absolutely.
I'm still considering it. I just haven't done anything about it. So I said, I don't know if I'm gonna do it. I said, it's something I'm still considering, but I don't know if I'm gonna do it or not. And then someone comes back and goes, well, have you ever thought about like doing like a blog or a Facebook page? And I said, huh, well, I might. I said, and so that kind of sat on the back burner for a little while. And so before it really started taking off, I'd made it on there and it sat there for about a month. I had maybe 10 or 12 followers, that kind of thing. People that knew me that were like friends and connections, that kind of thing. And so after about a month, I finally just started reaching out to people that I just typed in grief, and all what I consider the big names in grief started popping up. And so, like with raising money for the GoFundMe, I just started emailing people. I'm one of those people that when I get into something, I'm 150%.
Mm-hmm.
And so for days, I emailed like 40 and 50 people a day with kind of this generalized letter going, hey, my name is so and so. This is my story. I'm trying to get the word out there. I said, this is the kind of response I've gotten, that kind of thing. I said, would you mind taking a look at it, maybe sharing it, following it, liking it, whatever, just so I can get the word out there. And I got some response. And then there's a gentleman that's got a page called Surviving Grief. Uh, Last name's Sturgis. I can't remember his first name, but he reached out. He reached out to my email and goes, "Oh, I'd love to help you." He said, anybody I can, help in the grief community." And he goes, I've got some pointers for you on the page, and then if you want to write a book, I've got some pointers on it that you might want to consider. And I said, okay, let me know. And it was simple stuff like, on your icon for your page, you need to put a picture of your son, or maybe make something that's got your son's picture in it, so because people will gravitate to something that they can relate to. And
Yep.
then it goes, and then on your Facebook banner for your page, make something, maybe a collage or something of your son on there, because people will gravitate. It's something they get tangible that they can see. He said you'll get much more response that way than because the original icon was something that was kind of almost like a corporate logo kind of thing of just
Yeah.
the name of the page and all. And he goes, people will gravitate to something that they can relate to, that they can see, especially if they can see your son. Okay, so I changed that. And then he goes, um, if you're wanting to do a book, he said, I would suggest right now to creating a web page. He said that will be key with your book. He said it will help you out in the long run. I said, okay. I said, I'm not gonna make that quite yet because I don't really know if I want to write a book. And he did several other things, and he reached out to people, and I started getting followers that way. So um I did that, and then just through time in some of these grief groups, the original group that I was a moderator of, out of the blue, the admin of the group sent me Tanya Manley's name, and she
Mm-hmm.
messages me out of the blue. And typically, when I get a response that I don't know who they are online, my first response was, thank you for the message or the friend request, but what's the connection? How do we know each other? Just because I don't mind connecting with people, but I'm not going to put personal information out to people that I
Yeah.
don't really know who they are. No, there have been people that have like followed the Facebook page, the blog, that have followed my personal page, and I have no problem with that because I've kind of gotten to know them. They comment several times, so I've kind of gotten to know who they are. And so she messaged me and she said, "Well, Stacy sent me your name, said you'd be a good idea to be on my podcast. Would you like to be on?" And I said, "Sure." I said, "I can run my mouth as much as you want me to, as you've seen." Um, and so we set that up and do that podcast. And she posted, and not I think it was a week and a half later, she said, "Just so you know," she said, "of all the episodes I've done, you have now become the second most downloaded podcast on my entire podcast." And I went, "Wow, that's impressive." And she said, "In fact, the guy you surpassed, which is his name's Lenny Hunt, who's got like 300,000 followers on TikTok," she said, "You have now surpassed him." And I said,
Mm,
"Wow, that's a big deal." I said, "If he's got that kind of following and I have surpassed him," I said, something must be right. I must have hit something that
right.
resonates with people." And then I said, "Well, now I'm very competitive kind of thing." I said, "How close am I overtaking the top spot?" She said, "Oh," she said, "You surpassed second place, but she said, you got a ways to go before you overtake first." And I said, "Okay." I said, "This is a little disappointing because I'm very competitive." I said, "But I get it." I said, "I don't know who your top episode was, but," I said, "Okay." And so I got over the time I've gotten to know her. And like she said the other day, she said, "You and Lenny are probably my two most favorite people that I've come across." She said, "Every time y'all say something, something resonates with me, or something that I agree with, or something that I can share with other people." And I said, "Well, I appreciate that my weird, awkward sense of saying things resonates with you." And so since then, I've helped Tanya as much as I can. I've tried to send people her way, and just said, even on the my letters to Zachary page, I've said, "If you want to share your story," I said, "there's a couple of people I know that would love to have guests on the podcast." I said, "Because they're constantly looking for people." I said,
Hmm.
"It's a really easy, smooth process." I said, "It's typically a Zoom kind of thing." And
Yeah.
I said, "It's just talking." I said, "So if you can talk, you can do a podcast." And so I've sent everyone, like she was making a comment one day. She goes, "Well, I need an idea for another podcast." And I said, "Well, you've interviewed me, Lenny, and like two other men." I said, "Why don't you do a panel?" I said, "You've always commented about men." I said, "Ask all of the four men that you've done and do a panel podcast." I said, "If we're your bigger downloaded podcast, put us all together." I said,
Yeah.
"Maybe then we can be your most downloaded podcast because whatever we're doing is definitely hitting a chord with some folks." And she goes, "Well,
Right.
that's a good idea." And I mean, that was supposed to be this afternoon, but that's had to have been rescheduled due to some personal things with her.
Hmm.
And so, so I like when your name came across, I was just like, "Sure, I'd love to do it." I mean, if if anything to help with grief with you and to help with the page for me, that kind of thing, I'd love to do it. So that's helped. And throughout time, Tanya has sent page requests, I think, to probably 3,000 people she knows. And like every other day, I'd get a text goes, "I'm going to send requests to 1,000 of my connections to your page." Okay, thank you. I'm just like, I don't know how to respond to that. And
Right.
so that's kind of how it's evolved to now, like being, as of this morning, I'm inching closer to about 800 follows, that kind of thing. And so I've done that. And then Lenny Hunt, who's the one on TikTok, who's, in my opinion, big on TikTok, he messaged me the other day and he goes, "I'd like to collaborate with you. I'd like to do kind of a men's thing on YouTube. Would you be interested?" And I said, "Yes, I would." And because like the other day, I
You're
don't
like,
know.
is this a trick question?
Well, the other day I posted like on my personal page about all the things that were going on. Like I interviewed with a local magazine about possibly using my page in there. And, you know, I put it in general terms just because, uh, like with your podcast and Tanya's podcast, I was just like, "Well, I'm doing my second podcast this morning and then the second episode of the first podcast this afternoon." And then like with Lenny, I didn't know how much he wanted out there. So I was just like, I'm in possible collaboration with a big name in the grief community that when I get that information, I'll let you know. And so like he comes back, he goes, well, I see you got a lot going on. He said, you gonna have time for this? I said, yes, I will have time for this. I said, I will make time for
Yeah.
this. I said, most of that stuff has either already happened or it's going to happen today, Wednesday. And I said, after that point, I said, I will be free, kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing. And so we're collaborating with something he wants to do on YouTube and do kind of a video series. I said that would be great. I said I'd love to be a a return member of this if you like what I have to say. And so I'll be doing that. But ultimately, this page came about is I wanted to cater to men
Yeah.
because in all the groups I was a part of, the total percentage of men in the membership of each group was typically about 2%. And
Yeah.
of that 2%, maybe 0.5% actually commented.
Right.
Uh, and even of the comments, it wasn't on a regular basis, it was
No.
occasionally. And so initially, I came out and I wanted to make the page for just men. And then, the Mr. Sturgis who gave me the pointers, he goes, it's great that you want to cater to men. He said, but you would get a bigger following if you opened it up. And I have since seen that. And I said, I was planning on that, although my initial focus was men.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of when I talk to people and people comment, I said, yes, I initially put it towards men. I said, but it's open to male, female,
Yeah.
mother, father, siblings, children, whatever. I said, if my words resonate this much with these groups of people, then maybe it'll resonate with others. And
Right.
so that's kind of how it evolved to what it is today. And so, like, as of yesterday, of the total number of members, I'm not at 2% man. I'm actually at 12% man on there, which I literally look at that one stat every other day. And when it leaves 12%, no, in fact, the other day was 11.8. I'm just like, why have I dropped 0.2%? This is ridiculous. And people have told me, said, you're going to drive yourself crazy looking at it every day. And
You will.
I said, I get that, but I'm ADD and OCD. I said, it's in my nature. I said, I can't stop doing it.
Right.
So, I've done that and I have since I've initially it was all letters, but then I have since evolved into some would call it poetry, I guess you will. I don't know if I call what I write poetry on there, but even my mother has come back. She goes, for someone who had so much issue writing in high school, she said, it blows my mind how every day you come up with two or three different original pieces of writing and in various different forms and you post it literally every day. And I said, well, I said, initially when I did the page, I said, it concerned me because, a lot of these big name pages, they post probably once a day.
Right.
And I said, and it's not so much I feel like I have to, but that's just to keep my followers kind of engaged in it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I realized that when I finally started getting in a routine of it, I could do it once a day. And now I've gotten to the point, even when I'm in education. And so when I have a downtime in education, most of the stuff you see me posting on there, I have written on my downtime at work
Mm-hmm.
while I'm in a self-contained special ed classroom. And people
Right.
go, how do you have enough time or brain space to be able to do that in your downtime in a self-contained special ed classroom? I said, I just make time. I
Right.
said,
Well, and you've already created the routine for it too. So,
I have, and like even my mother goes, she goes, I don't understand how you come up with such different ideas, or like I may write on grief, but even though it's still grief, they're different enough where post one about grief is not the same as post two about grief.
right.
And I said, honestly, with how my brain works, I said, it could be as simple as I see something in the room that strikes me. And it could be as simple as saying a word Or like the other day, there was one I wrote called The Dark Side of Grief. And it
Hmm.
was just one day I was on that day I was online. Someone either posted on my page or one of the groups something about a difficult time. And it was just them commenting about their difficult time. And it went like that in my head. And I started it off. And I mean, I wrote like, I mean, if it's poetry, like 5 or 6 stanzas for it kind of thing. And it just flowed.
Yeah.
And I mean, I already have a big vocabulary because I do crossword puzzles, and that's vastly expanded my vocabulary. And so even my mother goes, it just blows my mind that for all the trouble you had when you were younger, that now you've come up to just be this person that writes these things that she was just like, they're all completely unique, they're all completely different, they all resonate, and I just said, I
Just
don't know
tell
if I'm
her.
I don't know if I'm self-taught or if it's motivation or what it is, but I will say that when people comment on it, I will go, I 100% this is inspiration from my son.
Hmm.
Honestly, that's where it comes from. And as someone who's religious and has faith and all that, I 100% believe it's God given.
Yeah.
It just based on how I was when I was younger, if you'd have told me then that I'm doing this now, I would have laughed at you. Go,
Right.
there's no way. So that's kind of how it all culminated into where we are kind of today, into what the page is.
Oh, that's fantastic. I was going to say, tell your mother about why you didn't do the writing back in the day. Tell her you were saving it up for now.
Well, and the other thing was and I'm still in education, but now I've done it backwards. I was originally a certified educator. But I've been out so long that my certification's lapsed because of being a
Hmm.
stay-at-home parent. And I'm back in education, but now I'm a parapro, teacher's aide, whatever you want to call it,
Hmm.
uh, doing that. But back when I taught PE, from time to time, I would have to send correspondence to the school because I was PE, and typically it was like running clubs and field days and that kind of stuff. I didn't typically send a lot out, but when I did, it went out to all 800 students kind of thing.
Right.
And my principal was a micromanager, and she always wanted to check over everything. And I can remember I would get things back that was like something bled on it because of all the corrections. She absolutely hated my writing. Every year I worked for her at her school, she hated it. Like I could never do anything right. I could never write anything that she
Hmm.
liked. And so I even tell my mother to this day, I'm just like, it amazes me now that I write this way for what it was when I worked for such and such principal because she absolutely hated it.
Yeah.
So
Well, whatever it is you're doing, don't stop. It's working.
apparently so.
Well, I have had an absolute pleasure having you
Mm.
on here.
Thank
And
you.
all the links will be posted below the podcast episode, so you'll be able to reach out. But
Okay.
real quick, give a quick synopsis of the pages that you have, where you want people to go and read and consume your stuff. Uh,
Okay.
and then I'll let you do that one first, and then I have one more thing.
Okay. The first and the main page is letters to Zachary. That's letters TO, not the number two, Zachary, Zachary. That is on Facebook. If you find it on there, the icon is of my son, and it's got writing kind of wrapped in a circle around it, just to give you an
Okay.
idea what you're looking for. That's my main page. That's my biggest following on there, so at this point. That's where I do all my main writing. That's where I post everything first. My next page would be Twitter. That's letters to Zachary. That's letters, the number two, and Zachary spelled the same way as the Facebook page. Well, actually, it's now X, but Twitter. Um, that I typically put, I don't post as much on, but I do post like almost like meme pictures with writing that I've created on them for that
Mm-hmm.
page. And I will do tweets on there from time to time, but that's more almost Instagram style on there, just because I think people resonate a little more with the visual versus the writing on at least
Right.
Twitter. I do have letters to the number two the same way as Twitter on Instagram. That's all the pictures as well on there as Twitter. I just did that because I know there are some on Twitter and some on Instagram. So
Yeah.
those are essentially the same thing. So that's letters, the number two, Zachary for both of those. And then I just got on TikTok at the request of Lenny Hunt. I'll say a shout out for him. If you don't follow him on Grief, follow Lenny Hunt. You won't be disappointed. But I got on there. The initial first poster, a lot of the like picture posts. I have done 3 TikTok videos on there. I'm still figuring it out on there. I like a lot of people don't. I don't know how I like listening and watching myself on there. So that's the biggest kind of
Yeah.
reason why I don't. I'll get more on there. It's just not right now.
Right.
So I do have some on there, and that's letters, the number two, Zachary, just like the other 3 social medias.
Hmm.
So for Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok is letters Letters two, which is the number two, Zachary, Zachary, for all 3 of those on there if you want to follow. But like I said, my biggest page is on Facebook, and that's letters to TO Zachary on Facebook.
Oh, fantastic. And then the last question, if you could tell anyone out there, like the men out there that are grieving the loss of their child, what would you say? Sum it up in three points.
First of all, I would say don't let society tell you how you feel. It is your feeling. What I have run across is society tells men that no matter what we're feeling, that the women's feeling comes first, no
Mhm.
matter. Nothing against women. That's
Right.
just what we were taught since birth. It's the old happy wife, happy life statement that goes along to everything. Your feelings are just as important. That would be my first point. My second point is vulnerability is not a weakness. I cannot stress that enough. You are human. All humans are vulnerable at some point. Some of us are better at hiding at it than others. Don't think because you're upset or maybe having a moment by yourself and you're crying because you've lost a loved one or a child or a wife or someone dear to you that you're weak. Honestly, in my opinion, it takes more strength to show your weakness than it does to hold it in. Because if you hold it in like me, it's going to eat you alive and your body's going to react to that. And whether you pay for it in your tears or you pay for it in your body just downgrading because of all the stress and that's on you, you will pay for it one way or another. The last thing I would tell you is who cares what anybody else thinks about your grief? I mean,
Yeah.
honestly, the most unsugar-coated thing I can say, and I've said many times, you know how many stupid opinions there are on the internet and stupid opinions from people in real life that you probably hear in a day? I said, what do you care about what they think? Men and a lot of women are of the mindset of, you're not going to tell me what to do. Well, if you're of that mindset, why are you letting society and other people tell you what to do? I mean,
Absolutely.
honestly. So you're all big and bad when their back is turned to you, but when they start facing you, you decide you want to cower away and not tell them that they can't tell you how to feel. That's a bunch of crap.
Right.
So don't let society, partners, friends, acquaintances tell you how you're feeling. Don't let them invalidate your feelings. Your feelings are just as important as they are. Now, granted, you may have to get through the obstacle of maybe the mother's is first, and fine, okay. However, you're still next. You still have the right to what you believe in. Okay. So those are probably the three biggest points I would say is just don't hold it in. Don't worry about what other people think. You do you when it comes to getting your grief out, because one way or another, it's gonna come out.
Yes.
So,
I love it. Those are fantastic points. And I
mhm.
just want to thank you again for being on the
Thank
podcast.
you.
Thank you so much for sharing your story
Thank
and
you.
your movement that is happening, whether you think it is or not, but it's a movement that you're creating, and I love it because I don't think that men do get out there enough and share their grief, their hurt, all of the emotions that we naturally feel as humans when we lose someone that we love so
Mhm.
substantially.
Mhm.
So thank you so much for that. And if you're not following Mr. Jason Tuttle, please follow him. Letters to Zachary. And thank you so much for being on the podcast. I'll see
Thank
you
you.
guys in the next one.
I really appreciate being on here. And um, if you decide to follow my page, I welcome you with open arms. If you never ever need anything, I'm literally a 30-second response away through Facebook. I DM or one of those channels.
Absolutely. Thank you again.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to this special episode of Release. All the links plus a few extras are posted in the show notes below. And if you think someone you know could benefit by listening to this episode, please share it with them. And as always, keep going, keep being, keep doing. You are amazing.